Are your crypto dreams about to come crashing back down? There's a lot of hype at the moment around the Bitcoin spot ETFs, and rightfully so. You know, a lot of hopes and dreams are pinned on January the 10th, 2024, with these impending SEC decisions around the Bitcoin spot ETFs. But what if we do not see these fantastic approvals and bullish movements for Bitcoin? What if the approval for the Bitcoin spot ETFs actually create a massive sell-off event? And I'm going to discuss all of the things I think are likely to unfold as we enter into 2024 in this video. So let's roll that intro and jump right down into it. So Bitcoin is on the cusp of a critical decision. We have to see Bitcoin either break up above some of its most recent resistances or start to turn down. With these Bitcoin spot ETFs being a critical component for the next bullish market, a lot of hopes and dreams are pinned on Bitcoin rallying up and seeing fantastic gains after an SEC approval for the Bitcoin spot ETFs. And like I said, all hopes are pinned on January the 10th, 2024, only really a few weeks away from today. And so what if we actually don't see what we're expecting, right? A lot of retail investors are expecting a big approval to create such huge demand coming in for Bitcoin that, you know, prices move up to new all-time highs. I think this is incredibly unlikely and a very risky strategy for retail investors to employ. Ultimately, if we actually reflect on the logical expectations on a Bitcoin spot approval from the SEC, we are likely to see a mass sell-off event. I am not the only one to believe that this is the case. We see analysts cropping up all over the place now, actually confirming what I've been talking about for the last few weeks, maybe even months. Ultimately, the Bitcoin spot ETF approvals are likely to kind of create cascading sell-off events for BTC. And unfortunately, most of the larger investors during 2023 haven't actually been using these moves to the upside to load up and accumulate in their positions. They've actually been using this move to the upside to exit their positions and basically take and extract liquidity from the market. I spoke about this just a few days ago in a video, and also down in our Discord server, where we can see any holder with more than 100 Bitcoin during the last 365 days is actually lower now than it was back in 2022. This is a huge problem when it comes to basically looking at who's holding Bitcoin and who is basically offloading Bitcoin. Retail investors have been coming in over the last year, and large institutional investors have been coming out. So when we see a Bitcoin spot ETF approval, what do we think is likely to happen? Well, people who were looking at the Bitcoin spot ETF as a massive catalyst for Bitcoin's next bullish move, they already kind of bought in. We aren't seeing right now a whole load of people just waiting on the sidelines, waiting for an approval to come in to buy Bitcoin. They were buying on the anticipation that Bitcoin will be approved for this, or Bitcoin spot ETFs will be approved by the SEC, and that's going to be, you know, really bullish for BTC. And I totally agree. I do think the Bitcoin spot ETF is going to be a fantastic catalyst for that next bullish market. But if we follow the logic here, there's lack of demand in the market. We can see this through the volume profiles. Bitcoin on exchanges has come down, and that's allowed price to move up because it creates an imbalance in the supply and the demand. I spoke about that only really a few days ago as well. And ultimately, anyone who was looking at Bitcoin and these ETFs, they've already bought their Bitcoin. They're kind of now holding it and waiting to see what happens. Ultimately, I expect anyone who was an early investor in the Bitcoin spot ETF news is likely to sell on the actual event of approval. As they say, you buy the rumor and you sell the news. Now, it's not the first time we would see something like this happen. It happens pretty much consistently in this space. Unless something is not known and just kind of hits you out of the blue, the market will react. If, however, you actually have something that is planned for a very specific date, you tend to find mass selling or the opposite effect occurring, right? Whereas you have the most bullish news happening on one specific date, usually you typically see price go in the opposite direction. So with a lot of people kind of looking at Bitcoin and the Bitcoin spot ETFs next year and pinning their hopes and dreams on it, I think that is a really risky strategy and something that I think is potentially going to lead many Bitcoin investors down into a lot of hurt in 2024. Now, the good news, ultimately it will be short-lived. I see a Bitcoin spot ETF sell-off event occurring and really just pushing Bitcoin down to additional levels of support. Not something that I think is going to be long-term in the way that it kind of happens. I see basically several areas of support for Bitcoin, and we'd have to see them all break under a sell the news event. Essentially, we talk about 35,000, well, we talk about 40,000, we talk about 35,000, 30,000, 26K, and so forth, right? There's a lot of areas of support for Bitcoin. It can't just move straight down to, let's say, $20,000. But we do have to be realistic. There are several scenarios that if they do not align up very well for Bitcoin, we could actually see cascading issues. As I said previously in many of these walk and talk videos, Bitcoin holders, retail holders of Bitcoin, I should say, are holding a very significant amount of the supply of BTC. Such a significant amount that may actually lead to a mass sell-off event if price starts to slip down and starts to spook the market. Retail investors act emotionally, not logically. And although logically we know that Bitcoin is likely to recover from whatever retracements there are, it will still cause panic within the retail side, seeing price retrace down, seeing their portfolios reduce in values, and ultimately maybe they were actually hoping to use that funding or use their gains that they make in 2024 for, you know, whatever real life lifestyles that they wanted to kind of achieve. And so a bit of a warning, I guess, putting out there today, that Bitcoin spot ETF, although it is fantastic, ultimately I see it as a sell-off event on the approval, because there isn't a product to launch straight away. We are going to in fact be seeing basically Bitcoin spot ETFs 3 to 6 months after approval. So we know that the actual news of approval is likely to cause a bit of selling pressure for BTC, and that selling pressure will basically just probably last for well, probably 3 months or so, as we see those momentum indicators, the relative strength index, the stochastic relative strength index, correct down on the weekly and monthly timeframes. And of course, we do have to layer in some of the other things that are going on as well, such as the Federal Reserve's interest rates. If they do decide to reduce their interest rates, historically speaking, this has led to a stock market crash as well of around 50%. So that in itself could also bring the market down. If we do not see a Fed pivot aligned to Bitcoin spot ETF approvals, we could have 2 capitulation events for BTC, which could potentially cause mass problem for those retail investors. So I'm going to leave the video there. Let me know what your thoughts are in the comments below. But if you have found it useful and informative, smash that like button. If you're new, subscribe, and I'll catch you all in the next one.